It's the Wilk Report. I'm Michael Wilk, coming to you from Cleveland, Ohio, with my review of Shazam, aka Captain Marvel. And there's a lot to unpack here, because I just came from seeing it today. And just to kind of give you an idea, because I'm going to do a comparison between the different Captain Marvels and say, will the real Captain Marvel please stand up? And there's a reason behind this question that if you're not a comic book reader, you may not be aware of. But Captain Marvel was originally a DC property. And so let's go to digitalspy.com. Here's why there are actually two Captain Marvels on screen this year. It's all Superman's fault. And this is from March 6th, 2019 by Ian Sandwell at Digital Spy. And the reason why it appears to be June 3rd instead of March 6th is because overseas they put the day of the month in front of the month and then the year. So no, this is not from June 3rd, it's from March 6th, or 6th of March. Alright, so let me just read. If you don't know your comic book history, you may not be aware that Brie Larson's Captain Marvel isn't the first or only Captain Marvel on screen this year. The next Worlds of DC offering, Shazam, will arrive in cinemas a month after the MCU's first female-led movie lands, and if it weren't for a lawsuit way back in 1951, the DC movie would have been called Captain Marvel instead. Created by artist C.C. Beck and writer Bill Parker in 1939, Captain Marvel was the alter ego of Billy Batson, who transformed into the superhero by speaking the word Shazam. He first appeared in February 1940 in Viz Comics, but publisher Fawcett Comics soon ran into trouble. DC Comics alleged that Captain Marvel was a copy of Superman, and a lengthy legal battle eventually saw Fawcett agree to cease publication of Captain Marvel-related comics. Now, Captain Marvel didn't appear in comics for over a decade before Marvel Comics trademarked the name in 1967. Their take on the character debuted in Marvel Superheroes number 12 before getting his own line, and it was markedly different to DC's version. Created by writer-editor Stan Lee and artist Gene Colan, Captain Mar-Vell is a Kree warrior who's sent to spy on Earth but ends up helping humanity. He gains the Captain Marvel moniker when citizens he saves mishear his name and call him Captain Marvel instead. And you can see the comic page here. And the costume, which is the inspiration. So anyway, Captain Marvel wasn't entirely a hit with readers, according to comics historian Don Markstein. In fact, Marvel didn't seem to quite know what to do with him, but they did put his comic out every other month through most of the 1970s, he added. The reason for this was that in 1972, DC acquired the other Captain Marvel from Fawcett. Due to Marvel's trademark, they couldn't publish a comic under his name and called it Shazam instead. DC did try to find a way around that trademark, though. You'll find on the earliest issues of Shazam, the title reads Shazam, the original Captain Marvel. Michael Uzlan, executive producer of all Batman movies, told Newsarama. And you can see the screen cap of the one of the early comics. When they were only 20 cents. And then Marvel, of course, sent them a cease and desist letter saying that under trademark laws, you couldn't even have the name prominently on the cover like that. So they had to then change it to Shazam, the world's mightiest mortal. To retain their trademark, Marvel continued to produce Captain Marvel comics with various characters taking on the name following the death of Mar-Vell in Marvel's first graphic novel, 1982's The Death of Captain Marvel. They've included Monica Rambeau, who appears in Captain Marvel, Janice Vell, and most recently Carol Danvers. Now, Carol Danvers first appeared in Marvel Superheroes number 13 as a colleague of Mar-Vell and became Ms. Marvel in 1977. This was after she was changed into a human Kree hybrid with superpowers following an explosion involving a Kree device. And later on, the X-Woman Rogue absorbed her powers and basically stole them. Because Rogue has the ability to absorb mutant powers by, or other superpowers by touching you and draining away your life energy. And so Ms. Marvel, aka Carol Danvers, spent much of the 80s in a coma, but eventually recovering, obviously. So anyway, she assumed the Captain Marvel moniker in 2012, and has remained Captain Marvel in the Marvel Comics universe to this day. As for the other Captain Marvel, DC Comics used the New 52 relaunch in 2011. I hate New 52 with a passion. God, I wish I had never done that. But they basically renamed the Billy Batson version. They renamed the alter ego Shazam. So Captain Marvel no longer exists in the DC universe, at least for the moment. So, there's the history of the original Captain Marvel. So, like I said, I just saw the movie today. It's still fresh in my mind. I'm going to give you a spoiler-laden review of the plot. So if you haven't seen it yet, turn off this video, go watch Captain Marvel tonight, come back and then watch the movie, but watch the video. But if you have seen it already, or if you don't care, stick around. I'll give you a brief breakdown of what happens in the movie. But of course, I'm not going to be able to do it justice. You have to see this on screen. It's awesome. So basically, we open in 1974, upstate New York. Young Thaddeus Savannah is in the back seat of his father's car during a trip, and he's arguing with his older brother, who is picking on him. And through his magic 8-ball, the wizard Shazam summons young Thaddeus to the Rock of Eternity, which is his magical temple hidden away in this pocket dimension. And so Shazam, who is the last of the Council of Seven Wizards, explains that he's spent centuries searching for a new champion who is pure of heart after the last one went insane and released these demons called the Seven Deadly Sins upon the world. And eventually they were recaptured and sealed in these stone statues, at the cost of the other 6 wizards' lives. And so Shazam's the last one. And Thaddeus is tempted by the sins who are still trapped in their stone form, and he's deemed unworthy, and he's banished back to Earth. And upon returning, he makes a scene in the car trying to go back, which causes the car to swerve and crash, and then his father, played by John Glover, ends up crippled, and his older brother blames him for the accident. And then we cut to present-day Philadelphia, where foster kid Billy Batson is searching for his mother. This is one of the few weak spots, I think, in the movie, because he somehow manages to set up a fake robbery at a pawn shop. I don't know how he managed to do it, considering he's just 14 and a foster kid. Maybe he bribed someone, or I don't know. But anyway, when the police show up, he locks them in the pawn shop and then uses the squad car's onboard computer to try and search for his birth mother. And of course, it doesn't work. He's got the wrong house. And he's eventually placed in a group home run by a couple, an Hispanic couple played by Victor and Rosa Vasquez, and they've got like these 5 other foster kids. Mary, who is white and almost going off to college. Then there's Pedro, who's also Hispanic and overweight. You've got Eugene, who's Asian and a stereotypical computer whiz, which I think is another weak point. Because you don't need to do the stereotyping here. You've got Darla, who's a little black girl, and then there's Freddie, who's white, but he's around Billy's age, but he's also disabled and can only walk with the aid of a metal crutch. So, you've got diversity here, and it's actually diversity done right, because all of these characters are, they're relatable, they're sympathetic, and you actually care about them. You invest in them emotionally. That's what that is the most powerful element in the film, is that unlike the MCU Captain Marvel, you actually care about these characters enough to the point where you feel bad for them and you want them to win. So, and even Thaddeus Savannah, despite, what he does later on in the film, you can actually kind of sympathize with his motivations, because he has spent his whole life being the runt of the litter, in his father's family, because they're wealthy, they own a large corporation, and he's, like I said, he's the runt of the litter, the youngest son, who's basically looked down upon as the family screw up and constantly told every day that he'll never be good enough, he'll never be man enough, that he's no good. And, that tends to affect a person over time. So you can kind of understand why he does some of the things he does, although you can't obviously forgive, his actions. So we've got, so like I said, we've got Billy. He's in the foster home now with the Vasquez family. He's not really enthusiastic about being there. Freddie, who's his roommate, and also a superhero enthusiast, he shows him his replica Batarang. He shows him his certified bullet that bounced off of Superman. Of course, Billy steals that, but Freddie figures this out and kind of confronts him about it. But he's trying though to. The entire family is trying to help him adjust because they want him to do well. So, but meanwhile, Savannah, who's, grown up bitter by his rejection by Shazam, he discovers a way to return to the Rock of Eternity. He's been using what wealth he got from his inheritance to take charge of this psychological study on mass hysteria. People who've had similar experiences to his as children, where the wizard Shazam summoned them and found that they weren't worthy. And you can kind of tell that Shazam has kind of been screwing up because he's old and his time is running out and his powers are fading, and he has to find someone to take his place as the guardian of the 7 deadly sins. And the Eye of Sin, which is this purple glowing sphere that contains the demons in their stone form. So, he's not exactly the type of personality who engenders a lot of sympathy here, but you can also understand his desperation. So, but he finally figures out through one of the videos being replayed that the sequence of symbols that appears, it appears 7 times. And so he manages to go ahead and open up the doorway to the Rock of Eternity. And the head of the psychological project, who is kind of upset at having been used for this crap, is incinerated. And upon entering into the Rock of Eternity, he steals the Eye of Sin, which becomes embedded in his right eye socket, becomes a sin's vessel, and defeats the wizard before he returns to Earth, and then he goes off and kills his father and brother, and pretty much everyone else in the boardroom, using the demons, who are able to come and go from his body at will through the Eye of Sin, which is, like I said, it's embedded in his socket. It's really kind of creepy and badass at the same time. So anyway, at school, Billy rescues Freddie from these bullies after they knocked him over with their truck. And, they chase Billy into a subway where Shazam magically summons Billy off of the subway train and chooses him as a new champion. He's looked into Billy's soul and discovers, okay, this is a kid who's pure of heart. And so he goes through the process. He has Billy take hold of the staff and call out the name Shazam, and he's transformed into an adult superhero endowed with the wizard's powers. And the wizard then crumbles into dust after thanking him, and that leaves his staff behind, which is important because it's going to be picked up by Savannah later on in youth. So anyway, Freddie sneaks back home because the Vasquezes think that Billy's run away. But Freddie obviously is the first one Billy goes to and reveals himself to. And so then they decide to go out and explore his newfound powers. He can hurl lightning bolts from his hands. He's got invulnerability, super strength, hyper speed. And of course, he's got the wisdom of Solomon, although that doesn't really get shown here until later in the film. But but then, and later on flight, although he doesn't really manage to figure this out until halfway through. So videos are made by Freddy while they test the powers, uploads them to YouTube when they become a viral sensation. And so Billy starts skipping school to use his power to get money. There's a scene where early on, the night that Billy comes home after getting his powers, where he tries to rescue a woman who's being mugged, but it turns out she had already pepper sprayed her would-be mugger. So, she's weirded out and just, gives Billy the money in her purse, and then thanks him, and then hightails it out of there. But they get like $73. So what do you think a couple of kids are going to do with it? Well, if you're in the body of an adult, well, you're going to do things you shouldn't do, like go to buy alcohol. So they head over to a convenience store and try to buy some alcohol. But then some robbers show up to jack the place. Billy, in his superhero form, still can't figure out how to turn back, but he stops the robbers, throws them out the window, literally. Then they get the beer and spit it out right away after taking a swig, because it's disgusting. So they trade it in for some beef jerky and energy drinks. But this is where the fun and games part starts in, where Billy starts abusing his powers to put on magic tricks and make money. And Freddy, for his part, he's kind of starting to take advantage of Billy, because because once they get Billy home, they're hiding from the Vasquezes, and the first room they duck into to get Billy out of sight, because he still can't figure out how to turn back, is Darla's room, and he manages to turn back by saying the name Shazam, because he's trying to explain to Darla what happened to him, and so he turns back into Billy. So they try and get Darla to promise to keep the secret, although that's not exactly something that she can guarantee, and the way everyone else figures it out, except for the Vasquezes, it's actually kind of endearing, and also kind of adds to the plot. So like I said, Billy's having his fun and games, but tension starts coming up when Freddy starts taking advantage and trying to use Billy's powers for his own gain to try and become popular at school, saying, "Hey, I know this guy." And the bullies, of course, they don't believe that he knows this new superhero, and I says, "Yeah, I'll have him come to lunch tomorrow." And they're like, "Yeah, if he doesn't show up at lunch tomorrow, we're beating you up." And so basically promises that he'll be there, and Billy doesn't. He hasn't agreed to this, so he's starting he feels like he's being used, so he kind of blows it off and goes to the Philadelphia courthouse steps to put on a magic show and make money, leaving Freddy to get suitcased wedgied. Yeah. So, then Freddy arrives and confronts him and, starts chewing him out, and Captain Marvel's not having it. He accidentally zaps a bus, that's a mile or two away, and causing it to go off the bridge that it's on. Billy, of course, is horrified at what he's done. He goes and he saves the bus, actually manages to, rescue everyone. He gets on the news, and that's how Savannah finds him. Because the demons have formed, after he kills his brother and father and everyone else in the boardroom, the demons say that the wizard Shazam has found his champion finally. So he goes on a hunt for whoever that is, but of course he doesn't know what he looks like yet until, Billy starts making himself into a public spectacle. So, in the aftermath of the bus rescue, Freddy comes and chews him out and says, look, you kind of left me high and dry there, and you've turned into the very bully that picked on me. and Billy's like, he's not sure how to handle this, because on one hand he's finally become a hero and gotten famous for being a superhero, but now he's getting bitched at by his foster brother, who, and again, this is kind of a weak point in the story, I think, because honestly, Freddy's got no business being upset with them. I mean, he has been using Billy's powers for his own gain. All right. And so Billy has every right to be upset about this and kind of blow it off. But he's also still being incredibly selfish, because he's really not doing what he should be doing as a real superhero up until that point. He's been using it to make money and basically to do magic tricks. So, but then Savannah shows up at the site of the bus rescue and starts going to town on Billy, because he's superpowered with magic from the seven deadly sins, and chases Billy to a mall where Billy is quickly realizes that he's out of his element. He changes back into his kid form and disappears, but Savannah manages to kidnap Freddy and forces Freddy to take him to the Vasquez home. So, back at that place, the other kids, through Mary, figure out Billy's secret. Really because earlier in the movie, Billy had rescued Mary from getting run over by a truck because she was distracted by her college admission letter. She got accepted into Caltech, which, on the one hand would be great, but at the same time, she's upset because she doesn't want to leave her family, and she's, because the Vasquez family has given her a home and siblings and, a sense of stability and identity and belonging. And she doesn't want to leave that, which, if you're a foster kid and you have that at long last, you don't want to leave it so quickly, But Billy's all like, you got to do you got to be on your own and not rely on anyone, because, that's the background he's come from. So, but he kind of screws up trying to maintain his secret identity because he automatically knows Mary's name and that she's in a group home, which he can't possibly know. And of course, the way he tries to explain away how he knows, it's not very convincing. So yeah, so Mary figures out from the news broadcast where Freddy is shown on camera chewing Billy out in front of the bus, that she and the other kids figure out who Billy is. And it's at this point where Darla says, reveals that she knew all along because, hey, technically I didn't tell. You all figured it out for yourselves. So I kept my promise, which it's really adorable. So, but then of course Savannah shows up with Freddy and takes the kids hostage, and then calls Billy and forces him to come home. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself because before Savannah shows up, the kids confront Billy with what they've learned, and Eugene informs him that they found his mother for him. She got divorced and went back to her maiden name, which is why he couldn't find her. So he goes to the apartment building where she lives, which is actually not far from where the foster home is, and learns that she actually abandoned him when he was 3 years old because they were at a carnival. And she won him a prize, but then he got separated from her and found by the police. But when she realizes that her son has been found, because she was a teenage mom, like 17, her husband was a deadbeat, and it's implied that he was abusive and no good, and ended up in jail, and where he still is. At the time of the movie, when the kids explained to him, that his father's in prison and his mother divorced and living in this apartment, and she's living with some guy when Billy goes to see her, and it's kind of implied that he's abusive toward her. So Billy's mom really kind of you feel sorry for her because you can understand why she decided to abandon him. I mean, you're not supposed to necessarily forgive her for what she's done, but you can at least understand where she's coming from, because she had problems of her own, where she realized she couldn't be the mother to Billy that she needed to be, and she figured it would be better if the foster care system at least gave him a chance at having a better life than she could provide. And she still is not able to do that. And so Billy realizes that his mother can't take him back then, nor does she want to. You can tell, like, she actually feels bad about it, but she's kind of like stuck in this life where she feels like she can't get out of it, and she doesn't want to subject a kid to the life that she's trapped in. So, so Billy gives her back this little compass trinket that she won for him at the carnival all those years before, and saying, you need this more than I do. And then, goes back home. But of course, then Savannah calls Billy at that point and saying, I've got your siblings here. If you want to see them alive again, come and give me your powers. And so, Billy shows up in his Captain Marvel form, and he travels with Savannah to the Rock of Eternity, where the bad guy takes the wizard's staff. But Billy's brothers and sisters follow, and they attack Savannah. I mean, they hit him in the back of the head with a batarang while the sins are out of his body, and they realize that Savannah loses his powers when all the sins have left his body. So, but then of course Savannah recovers, and the sins go back into him, and he gets his powers back, and chases them throughout the temple. And so Savannah pursues Captain Marvel and his family to the Winter Carnival, where he unleashes the sins on the crowd. And while Billy is battling wrath, the other sins capture his family and demand his powers. But then, Savannah recalls the sins, and Billy takes the opportunity, because he's got because basically he's still got the family where he wants them. He gets overconfident, and he uses the opportunity once his family is momentarily out of danger to take a staff and stun Savannah with it. And then recalling the words that the wizard spoke to him, he has his family grab hold of the staff and say the name Shazam. So the kids get transformed into adult superheroes like him. And this is where we get the Captain Marvel family, which is just brilliant here, because it's really in keeping with the original DC comic and Fawcett comic, because he had like Mary Marvel and Kid Marvel, I guess. So, it's really awesome. So the six of them battle the sins, and while Billy goes off and fights Savannah, and finally they end up on this. The roof of the skyscraper where Billy basically goads the sin of envy, who has remained inside Savannah all this time, taunts envy as being the weakest and ugliest and most useless of the sins, baits him into leaving Savannah's body, which leaves Savannah powerless and falling off the roof of the skyscraper and hanging on for dear life. And then when Billy shouts Shazam to zap envy with the lightning and temporarily disable him, Savannah goes tumbling. Billy rescues him at the last minute before he hits the pavement below, and takes him back to the carnival, where he removes the Eye of Sin from Savannah's eye socket, and that captures the 7 deadly sins. And Billy and his brothers and sisters are hailed as heroes, and so he ends up embracing his foster family as his real family. And so, when they take the Eye of Sin back to their prison, they realize, hey, we can use this as our new superhero layer. So then later on, Billy arrives at school and keeps the promise that Freddy made on his behalf to show up and have lunch with Freddy and the rest of their siblings. Oh, and then Superman shows up, although not Henry Cavill, obviously, because they never show him above the neck, only his body. So presumably it's some body double because they couldn't get Cavill. So then there's a mid-credit scene where Savannah is in his cell. He's scribbling runes on the walls, trying to figure out how to get magic back. And then Mr. Mind, which is this kind of worm-like creature. And let me show you the Wikipedia here. He's this fictional supervillain who's originally created by C.C. Beck and Otto Binder. And his true appearance, because he's only a voice, and then Captain Marvel Adventures number 26 in 1943, he's a primary Shazam villain. So he's a 2-inch alien worm of high intelligence, telepathic, usually carries out his plans through an organization called the Monster Society of Evil. And so then he's got like this little electronic device that he uses to synthesize a voice that he can use to talk to people. So he appears to Savannah in his jail cell and offers an alternate way of getting magic back. So it's kind of hinted that maybe he'll become Black Adam through some alternate method in the sequel, which I hope happens, because this film is absolutely brilliant. And so just to give you an idea of why, it's because the production budget is about $98, maybe $100 million ballpark figure. It's already done $96,324,739 as of today, with a foreign box office of $164,100,000 for a total as of today. $260 million, $424,739. Now, so, I mean, this movie is definitely making its money back, and it's only been out for a couple weeks, so it's not done yet, and I think it'll probably do well enough to have a sequel. And you compare this to Marvel's Captain Marvel. The production budget is not listed, but it's been rumored to be up around the $200 to $300 million mark. And of course, since Marvel has been marketing it all to hell, it's probably like the full budget is probably somewhere closer to around the $500 million mark. So it's already like made its money back and doubled its total budget. And that's a weird thing about the movie business, is that they don't actually show you the total budget. They only show the production budget, and that kind of gives you a false perception of how successful a movie is. Oh, it exceeded its production budget by this much, but they still have to sell the movie to get you to go to the theater and watch it. They still have to get it distributed to the theaters, and all that costs money. So you figure, Marvel's Captain Marvel, even though it's made over $1 billion, but it's also spent probably around $500 million just to produce it and sell it to the theaters and get it distributed. So, so that global box office take, you got to take that with a grain of salt. But there's an article here that I want to read to you, and this is the thing that this and a couple of others like it, but this is the one I chose. But there's an argument here that having a lower budget actually has kind of helped Shazam at the box office. So let me go ahead and read this here. It may seem like a contradiction, but there's definitely an argument to be made for the idea that having unlimited resources can actually hurt a film. It's something I've discussed periodically on the Fat Boy podcast. This idea that filmmakers and creative types work better when their backs are pressed ever so slightly against the wall as opposed to having a blank check to do whatever comes to mind, such seems to have been the case with Shazam. And this is actually kind of true because watching Black Panther last year, don't get me wrong, I like that movie a lot, but I can tell where the story suffered because they had so much money that they didn't quite know what to do with it, so they just added on some of these useless action sequences that really, in my opinion, added nothing to the story. So so here they didn't have such a large budget, and so they were forced to focus more on the story, and in this instance I think it works a lot better. So let's go ahead and continue. A few months back, the internet was startled to discover that David F. Sandberg, who directed the movie, had made a very good-looking comic book adaptation with a budget that was a far cry from what these movies typically cost. With a rumored budget of just $98 million, Shazam was poised to be a success for DC Entertainment regardless of whether or not it was beloved by fans and critics. Thankfully, it ended up being beloved anyway, for reasons that I will go into, compared to the MCU Captain Marvel. With stellar reviews from critics, an A-cinema score from fans, and an opening weekend that saw Shazam perform beyond its modest expectations, DC has its second straight hit following the enormous success of last December's Aquaman. And there's actually a funny post-credit scene where they're trying to figure out if Shazam can communicate telepathically with fish, and he says it's kind of a useless superpower, and Freddy shows him his Aquaman t-shirt, and it's like, yeah, well, it's not that cool. And it's not actually, because, fish can only survive in water. So if you're on the surface, it doesn't quite work. But I mean, it's a nice lighthearted scene after the mid-credits one. So in a new interview, Sandberg opened up about what it was like to make a movie of this scale with under half of the budget that films like Man of Steel or Batman vs. Superman got. Even David Ayer's smaller scale, grittier Suicide Squad cost a reported $175 million to make, and that's just the production budget again, because you're spending anywhere from one half to the entire budget of the movie. So figure 175 million, you multiply that by 2, and you've got something closer to the total budget, which is probably why that movie didn't do so well, nor the Batman v Superman or Justice League. They spent way too much, and Sandberg actually says that having a higher budget often leads to greater pressure, and it increases the chances your film might fail. And he says, and this is a quote, "I still would have taken on the challenge, but yeah, the higher the budget, the bigger the risk of failure, so it certainly feels safer and more comfortable with having a somewhat lower budget." And he has a point, of course, because each of these previous DC films, quoting from the article, mentioned did very good numbers for Warner Brothers, yet since they cost so much to make, executives weren't exactly dancing down the hallways in Burbank. When your budget is sky high, so are the expectations for the kind of profit your movie will turn, and so when it doesn't meet those expectations because you spent so much making it and so much selling it to theaters, you really have to make a lot more than what you end up making. That's why Batman v Superman, even though it made its money back and turned a profit, but it didn't turn the kind of profit that Warner Brothers was hoping for, because it didn't make the money that justified the huge expense that was poured into it. So yeah, that's really, I think, one of the things that's helping Shazam right now in the theaters is that because it's got a smaller budget, they're able to focus more on telling the actual story, and therefore they made, in my opinion, a better movie than what MCU does with Captain Marvel, which, because in Shazam, you have actual characters there, and you care about these characters. They're sympathetic, they're relatable, you actually invest in them emotionally, so that way when you put them in a position where they are threatened, then you feel bad for them and you want them to win and not come to harm. And that's what a movie should make you do. And even the villain, Thaddeus Savannah, even though he does horrible things in the movie, he commits murder, he abuses his power, he threatens innocent lives, but even then you can understand what is driving him. Here is a boy who has already told his entire life that he was no good, that he would never amount to anything, he would never be a man, he would never be good enough. And then he's offered the powers of magic, beyond his imagination, only to again be told, you're not good enough. And then thrown back into his life like nothing was supposed to have ever happened, and then be blamed for crippling his father. And spend the next 45 years having to live with that blame and hatred and resentment. So, yeah, imagine what that does to someone when he gets older. And so even though you can't forgive him for what he does, but you can at least understand why, and maybe kind of sympathize just a little bit with him. And that's what makes a good villain. So, and it's not like there's, I mean, compare that to Black Panther, like I said last year, one of my biggest complaints is that, despite Killmonger being, potentially a sympathetic version, but they were kind of like bouncing back and forth for his motivations. On the one hand, he wants revenge on his family for what they did to his father. On the other, he wants to launch a crusade against the rest of the world to free the African diaspora who's been oppressed, throughout the world. So, it's like these conflicting motivations that seem like they're competing with one another. And so that I thought that kind of detracted from it. I think they should have just picked one and stuck with it. Because revenge is motivation enough for a lot of villains. So, and it's not like the circumstances of what made Killmonger weren't enough to get you to sympathize with him, even if you disagree with what he does as a result of the conditions that made him. So, but with Shazam, I think they got it right by keeping it simpler. And, again, overall with the story and the character arc that, Billy has to undergo a hero's journey. He starts off, as a kid, he's had a rough life. He's, trying to find something that, it's a classic story of finding something only to realize that you had it all along. And, learning to appreciate what you have. And, and along the way you find a greater purpose for yourself. You contrast that with the MCU's Captain Marvel. And again, I have to wonder what they were thinking. First of all, in casting a shameless troll like Brie Larson, who does nothing but, basically she's pulling a Ruin Johnson by trolling people online and in interviews and acting like a prima donna who, everyone should be scared of. It's like, you haven't earned your chops. Okay? For all you, they keep pushing Brie Larson's Captain Marvel as this feminist icon. She really hasn't shown much feminist qualities here. They took Samuel L. Jackson's character Nick Fury and turned him into a laughingstock, basically an incompetent buffoon who gets his eyes clawed out by a cat. Even though it's an alien disguised as a cat, but it still takes the form of a cat, and scratches his eye out, and that's how he loses his eye. And it's like that really diminishes Nick Fury, because it's implied, in one of the Avengers movies that last time I trusted someone, it cost me an eye, and it turns out, it got scratched by a cat. Yeah, so and that actually, in my opinion, is actually a kind of a racist treatment to give to Samuel L. Jackson, because you're basically reducing his character to a joke in Captain Marvel and a comic relief, and now going into Avengers Endgame, having seen Captain Marvel, what are we to make of him now? So you're showing disrespect to Sam Jackson. You've got a wooden and lifeless actress playing, some god or goddess coming down from Mount Olympus to slum it among the mortals. You can't really sympathize with her. She does not undergo a hero's journey. She just, has these powers, is able to use them, and then beats everyone up. There's no, there's no real save the cat moment in MCU's Captain Marvel. There's nothing that gives you any reason to sympathize and relate to it. So, I mean, and it seems to me like a lot of the box office for MCU Captain Marvel may have come from advanced ticket sales and benefiting from being released, not that long from Avengers Endgame. People want to, people are invested in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They want to see, chapter by chapter. So, but, looking at the actual movie, it's like, even people who liked it said, yeah, I mean, you compare it to, say, Alita Battle Angel, where you've got a female protagonist and she's the underdog, and she starts off much like Brie Larson's Captain Marvel as a Mary Sue, but she doesn't actually stay a Mary Sue, and you actually become emotionally invested in the character because of the emotional attachments she makes in the story and the journey that she has to make, to try and recover who she was and find out her mission in life. And with Shazam, you've got, a kid who, again, he has to go through a hero's journey and find himself and, find out what's really important in his life. So, in terms of, the real Captain Marvel, I have to go with Shazam because, the writing here is just top notch. I give this a solid 8 out of 10 movie, whereas with MCU Captain Marvel, maybe 5 or 6, which isn't really all that great. Mainly because, I gave Black Panther a much higher score because the story was actually better. It still had, plenty of flaws that I think diminished it, so I give it like 7.5 out of 10. But, I would have, given, say, Spider-Man Homecoming, much higher score than that, or even Incredible Hulk and first Iron Man. I have to say, I thought better of those movies, but with MCU Captain Marvel, it's just, stiff and wooden acting from the protagonist, no sympathetic characters, disrespecting Samuel L. Jackson and his character. It's just, it's kind of a hot mess, and, its success, I think, has more to do with marketing strategy than anything else. But with DC's Captain Marvel, Shazam, I think they've really captured it here. And I think Mr. Sandberg has probably helped save the DC Extended Universe, because you've got a story here that I think is solid. You really have a fun time with this. It's kind of like the movie Big with Tom Hanks, where Fred Savage wishes he were big, and so the Magic Genie carnival attraction turns him into an adult played by Tom Hanks, and he has to undergo his own sort of journey of finding himself. So it's kind of like that, but imagine if instead of turning into Tom Hanks, you turn into a superhero played by Zachary Levi, who is very convincing as an adult, basically a kid in an adult body. So, I also found the superhero suit actually looked a lot better than the overdone Superman suit that was used in the movie's ending scene, because and I hated that whole chainmail looking monstrosity that Henry Cavill wore throughout his DC movies, because it just looked awful and it was too dark, and you're supposed to be and then I blame Zack Snyder for it because he's an idiot and doesn't know how to make a proper superhero movie. Watchmen, I think, was more of an anti-superhero movie, or super anti-hero. But here, you've got a film that I think succeeds on character and storytelling and plot. Very few holes in the plot. I do have to wonder why the Wizard Shazam had to be killed off without giving Billy any guidance whatsoever. But then, I guess, maybe it was decided, well, we can't really spend that much money on giving him a mentor, because that takes away the importance of the foster family, the Vasquezes and their kids. So I kind of understood that and why it was necessary, and it probably just would have added more expense for less of a payoff, because a large part of the movie is Billy learning to realize that he already has what he was searching for. He just couldn't see it. So yeah. Anyway, that's my review of Shazam, aka the original Captain Marvel and the true Captain Marvel. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree, disagree? Did you like the movie? Why or why not? I want to hear about it. If you like what you hear and you want to hear more, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to receive notifications whenever we upload new content. And if you want to help to support the channel, head over to our Patreon or Subscribe Star page. Help us keep the lights on and bring you more content. Until next time, this is Michael Wilk for the Wilk Report saying take care, good night, I'm out.